character that you're most well known for, apart from Wurzel Gummidge, is Doctor Who.
Mm.
How did you get involved in that? Did you always want to be Doctor Who?
No, never. I'd never seen Doctor Who, never in my life, although my ex-wife, I think one look at one of them just to see how she was. And, but I'd never seen it, and I had no preconceived ideas of how it should be played. It was funny how it came about. I was making the Navy Lark, which was my radio show, which ran for 18 and a half years. It was the longest running radio comedy show, I think, in history. And this was a great sort of meeting of friends, of Tanya Evans and Ronnie Barker, myself, Leslie Phillips, Stephen Murray, Richard Caldecott. And year after year after year, as we got older and older and older, we used to turn up on a Sunday with our Sunday papers, and the poor producer had a terrible time with us because he couldn't push us or hurry us because it was a conventional job, really. But we wouldn't change it for the world. We loved it, and we heard all the latest jokes from Ronnie and all the gossip and things from Leslie. And one day at 10 Evans, who used to play Taffy Goldstein, said, "Hey, why don't you put yourself up for Doctor Who?" And I said, "Well, why? Is Pat Troughton leaving?" And he said, "Yes, he is." And I said, "Well, I don't think, what do they want with me?" And he said, "Well, I don't know, I think you'd be rather good type for Doctor Who." And so I suggested it to my agent, and there was a terrible pause on the end of the telephone. And I said, "All right, well, forget it. It's probably not a very good idea." He said, "No, I don't think it is, but I'll try." So he phoned up the producer and suggested it, and there was also a terrible pause. And he said, "Yes, I thought your reaction would be that. Mine was too." And they said, "Wrong. On the contrary, we're just flabbergasted. May we read you our short list compiled over 2 years ago?" And my name was second on the list, which is the most extraordinary thing. I never knew. Nobody had told us, or my agent or me. But there it was. It had been there for some 2 years. And so I was eventually talked into playing it. I began to backpedal then, thinking I don't want to do it. But of course, I didn't know how to play myself. I've always hidden under a green umbrella. I'd always been a character actor. I'd never really played anything dead straight. And this eventually intrigued me, and I eventually played it as me, with a lot of covers, like fancy capes and frilly shirts and pretty clothes and velvet jackets. And my companions were dressed in the very latest things, you know, and Katie Manning always wore the very latest gear from Bieber and so on. And so it became a very trendy program, and I incorporated Aikido into it, martial arts, which was very popular then, and the fact that I loved gadgets, and I used to ride motorbikes and fly aeroplanes and speedboats and ski, and I'd do all these things in the show, and so it was like a sort of science fiction James Bond, really, my era of Doctor Who. And it was great for 5 years, but then dear Roger Delgado, who's one of my greatest friends, both on and off the screen, was killed in an accident, and that started the breakup of what was a wonderful team. And Barry Letts, the producer, left, and the Terence Dix, the editor, left, and I thought, well, that's the time to go. But I coupled with the fact that I asked the BBC for a raise, and they said, "We're sorry to see you go," immediately.
You sound as if you were quite involved. Obviously, you have to be involved in a series like that, but you said that you incorporated speedboats and things. How involved were you with the story making and the actual direction, production side of it?
In no way with the story making, because I hadn't the time, because, you see, we were always the writing was jumps ahead of what we were doing. So you were getting new series being written and approved and costed by the producers, while we were shooting things that had already been written, approved, and costed. So that I hadn't the time to devote to it, because I was so busy studying the scripts, rewriting a lot. We used to rewrite with our directors, like Michael Bryant particularly, who was very close to me, and we worked very closely together. So the first couple of days we'd spend in sort of rejigging things that didn't happen to suit us, or we didn't like if we had new writers that hadn't quite got the drift of how we worked. And so a lot of time was spent doing that. But my influence was allowed to bear because of my inventiveness with, I'd say, the clothing side of things, and putting Aikido in. I said to Barry, I'd like to use martial arts rather than fisticuffs or use weapons. I think it's better to have it as a protective form of attack, you know. And certainly Barry knew that I loved riding motorbikes. I still do. I still ride motorcycles all the time. I used to race cars. I used to race motorbikes, and so I was quite fearless as far as general gadgetry, driving of them. If it came to accidents or falls, then naturally my stuntman Teddy Walsh would do it, because he's a marvelous man. In 5 years, we never ever saw his face. He always managed to cover up at the last minute. So he's a great stuntman. But, so that as far as that was concerned, I had influence, yes. And Barry, then when I produced this remarkable Whomobile, this beautiful streamlined car which used to fly and come out of the sky. I mean, I built that and took it to the BBC and parked it in the car park and said to Barry, "Let's I want to show you something out of the window." And he said, "Look." And he said, "My God, who is that?" And I said, that's mine, it's the Whomobile. So in it went.
What was it like working with the monsters and the Daleks and the Cybermen?
Oh, the Daleks are an awful bore. I hated the Daleks.
They used to terrify me.
No, I hated them. I thought they were stupid things. They looked as if they were made of wood. They had sink pumps sticking out the front. That was a useless device. And also, you only had to go down a flight of stairs, and you'd got them up the creek. And I mean, they could only go trundling along the flat, so they were the most useless thing. I mean, no, in any case, they weren't anything. They were only an encasement for a being inside. No, I don't know how they became as popular as they did. I didn't like them and tried to avoid working with them. I'm working with Doctor Who again, incidentally, next year in March. They've asked me to come back and do a thing called the Five Doctors, and hoping to get all doctors, not Bill, of course, because Bill's dead, but they'll use a look-alike for him and involve the fact that it really isn't him in the plot. But if they can get Tom Baker, then it'll be Tom, Peter, myself, and Pat Troughton, and a look-alike for Bill.
Something to look forward to.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. It should be fun. Since last year, I did over 13 episodes of Doctor Who. My old Doctor Who's were shown last year, and it started a whole new upsurge of fans for Doctor Who, which in a way pleases me, but another way it doesn't, because apart from the fact that you get the lovely repeat money, but you've got a lot of fans writing photographs and things who spend an enormous amount of time and money and energy puffing a program which you did, 12 years ago.
The Daleks never bothered me very much. It was the Yetis. They put me off the underground for years. It's now 24 minutes to 10.
Mm-hmm.
He is a wonderful character. He must have developed as you've played him more and more and more. You must have worked on him. How much of the original idea, did you have in your mind when you started?
Well, years and years ago, before you were born, I was in a radio show called Waterlogged Spa with Eric Barker, who I mentioned previously. And Eric wrote this wonderful show, which was the top radio show for many, many years after the war. And in it was a character called the Postman. And he was a man who was a wicked old postman, had been a bugler in Plymouth Barracks in the services days. And he used to say, "Well, what does it matter what you do so long as you tear him up?" That was the catchphrase of this character. And everybody all around the country was going around saying this catchphrase. And he was a wicked old reprobate who steamed open people's letters and listened in on to people's telephone conversations. And eventually I made a series of it called Puffney Post Office, which was a spin-off of that. And I'd always wanted to use this character for something on television, because it was far too good a character to miss. But I never could find the right hook for it. Until one day Gareth Wigan, the film producer, who's now one of the heads of American filmmaking, asked me to make a movie written by Keith Waterhouse and Willis Hall of Wurzel Gummidge that I remembered very well because I read it as a child, the books which were written in the 30s. And it had been a popular television and radio series on Children's Hour. And they thought of me naturally because they remembered the Postman and they remembered this voice, and I'm tall and comparatively thin. I used to be thin, not quite so thin now. But they thought it'd be good casting, asked me to make the movie, and I said yes, but sadly it collapsed and we didn't get it away because of finance and distribution and that sort of thing. And so I said, well, write me a pilot and I'll see if I can sell it to television. So I took it to the BBC knowing they'd grabbed the opportunity and they turned me down flat. So I then took it to Thames that I'd just been working for 4 years with in Whodunit, and said, well, I'm sure you'll like this, a lovely new show for me, completely different character and so on. And they said, I don't think no future in that. And eventually Southern took the plunge, and Lewis Rudd had the foresight to see it, and we became really somewhat of a cult after 4 weeks of transmission. and we've been one ever since, sadly. Southern lost their franchise, and now TBS have taken over. They didn't want to take us on. But now we have a new producer called James Mitchell, and all things being equal, we start a very big, long series shooting in Southern Ireland next year. Weekend spot at 5:15 in the autumn.
You do an awful lot of personal appearances as Wurzel Gummidge, and I've seen you do it, and I notice the children all come up and ask you questions. You must have a good mind for quick thinking and some of the answers you give.
Yes, of course, the questions turn out to be quite often the same, and so therefore the answers equally can be somewhat repetitious. But yes, you have to be very aware. I never, ever play Wurzel any other way than for real. So if a child asks me a question for real, I give them an answer for real, even if it's in a fantasy world. If they ask me how to change my head, I say, no, I won't do it, because it's very bloody and makes terrible mess, and I don't want to do it here, and it's awful. And don't you try, because if you turn it the wrong way, you won't get it back on again, and so on, because otherwise they'll start twisting their heads off. You know, they do this. But they ask a lot of questions about Aunt Sally, and they often, when you and I are on location, they run between us trying to make the peace and get us together and get us married and so on. They become very concerned and very involved with the whole thing. And what I think they love about Wurzel is that they all seem to, is because he's a rebel.
A slice of cake and a cup of tea suits Aunt Sally and that suits me. Offer us the world, but all we'll take is a cup of tea and a slice of cake. A cup of tea and a slice of cake. When the moon comes up or at daybreak, ever after we'll live happily on slices of cake and cups of tea.
Some kids hang up stockings, and some of them pillowcases. The holes in my stockings shocking. My pillowcase are disgraces. I ain't got much, just scraps and such. All worldly goods I'm lacking. A scarecrow's bed where he lays his head is an heap of straw and some sacking. On t'other hand, I don't need a lot to stop me getting tearful. Just three things, one cold, one hot. Both of them keeps me cheerful.
A slice of cake and a cup of tea suits Aunt Sally and that suits me. Offer us the world, but all we'll take is a cup of tea and a slice of cake. A cup of tea and a slice of cake. When the moon comes up or at daybreak, ever after we'll live happily on slices of cake and cups of tea. Fill it to the brim, suits Aunt Sally, so that suits him. They don't want a bottle of fancy wine, stick them in the brewery and they'll decline. A slice of cake, cut it nice and thick, smother it in icing, make them lick, and never ever have to live it happily.
On slices of cake,
Slices of cake,
on slices of cake,
slices of cake, slices of cake, and cups of tea.
Wurzel Gummidge and a cup of tea and a slice of cake. And of course Jon Pertwee was talking to Debbie Fisher before that, and that's the end of that part of the programme for this evening. In fact, it's nearly all we've got time for altogether.